Hello and welcome to Tithely Backstage. So excited that you're joining us for this episode. We are your hosts. My name is Casey. We also have John Holdcamp and Dan Ermler here. We're going to be talking through some great stuff. But before we get into that, we always start every episode with a question off the top. And this question is all about software bugs. So that being said, John, I'm going to throw it to you first. For the question up the top, what is the most annoying software bug that you have personally
So I
experienced?
think I
Walk
may
us through that.
actually be foreshadowing things to come here of is it a bug or is it a feature? But the thing that annoys me to the moon is when you go to a website and there is no login button and they just try to get you to sign up, even though this is where you're supposed to go. And you're supposed to go to like / login. Now I say that as is it a
Hmm.
feature or a bug? Because there are times where it's been a bug. And the one I want to bring up is on Apple's side, there was a company called Test Flight that they eventually acquired, and that's how developers could actually test builds and you could share it. It basically creates your own app store that you can send to anybody, and you have a personal app store for testing. But before Apple acquired them, there was just Test Flight. And I actually got to use the service very early on. And there was a point where they just got rid of their button altogether. Their login button was gone. And I got to reach out to the founder. And he's like, oh, yeah, we accidentally removed that. So there was just no way to log in. So that's a bug that stands out just because of the history behind it and how eventually the fact I got to be there that early and eventually they were acquired by Apple was like a fun story of seeing them so early. And what kind of success do you get where you're actually acquired by Apple and become the way Apple beta tests with all their developers? So there you go.
Well, this is fun. I'm going to be able to tell a story that's the complete opposite of being purchased by Apple. With the last company, we used to send video files, but mainly print files, like a PDF. We did a lot of church printing where they would design a brochure, we would design a brochure, and then we send it off to printer, and we'd want to put it in the software so we could basically make sure that you're approving what you see, as in if there's any misspellings, you've approved it as is. Because man, it was really weird when you'd have misspelling, like, who did that? It's like, well, you did because you sent us the copy. So we had this software which we loved, and it was called Proof Me. Okay. And we noticed one afternoon we were uploading to Proof Me, and it just had a little glitch, and we didn't think anything of it. We were like, we'll just check back. And of course, Proof Me came back and said, hey, we had some issues with the database. It's not quite loading. Give us a little bit of time. We'll get back with you. No problem. Next day we come in and they're like, the issue's a little bit more significant than we thought, but don't worry, we have great engineers. So it's like, there's this. By Friday, the entire homepage of the website was down, and all they were showing was where we at on the status of this thing. I think it was by the next week or the week after, the CEO had said, basically, we're at a critical failure in our system, and we have nowhere to go now. It is completely done. Like, we cannot bring back what was there, and so we're shutting down the company. And so that's what happened to Proof Me, man. And so I think if you Google proofme.com right now, you'll end up on some random website that bought that domain. But that's a horrible, it's like bugs gone horribly wrong. Like, man, the house has now been
Yeah.
infested, and we just have to torch the thing.
I like you say that, but I feel like every platform has the opportunity for that to happen. It's up to
Oh,
redundant
100%.
systems and what you have in place. Like if you think about any
Correct.
company you've ever worked for, it's always been possible that that could happen. It's just unfortunately in their case they didn't have any backup.
Yeah, we have a department here that you've probably never heard of called DevOps, and they're actually responsible for all of our server infrastructure.
Hmm.
And you want to make sure you're DevOps. You have really smart, good guys, and we do. We have some of the best in the world. But you want to make sure you have those, or else,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, it's so good when something happens, you can go and say, hey, could you just roll it back? And they're like, yeah, we can roll it back. And you're like, okay, good. We're back to at least where we were. Yeah,
Yes.
Proof Me's gone and never coming back. So they went to software heaven. So yeah.
Rode off into the
Oh
sunset.
my
Yep.
goodness.
So good. When I think of this, of like the most annoying bug, I really actually have one particular situation that stands out like a sore thumb, if you will. Every year, our family goes into our collective iPhoto library that we share photos from throughout the year. We have little kids and birthdays and all the great moments. and we create a printed photo album. So it's kind of my job as the dad. So I do this kind of in November, I order it, and then it's under the tree to open for Christmas. It's kind of like a year in review. We've kind of got a bunch that we've got at this point. But that's a big process. It takes time to go through the photos, decide which is my good side, which is not my good side, all that great stuff, plan it out in the layout of the pages. And there is just this past year where I believe that iPhoto outsourced it. It used to be that Apple kind of had their own in-house version. They outsourced it and they had their preferred group or preferred company to use. And so I put through all the work and I was clicking that final save button. And yes, you can probably make fun of me for not saving throughout, and that'd be very warranted. But I waited till close to the end, click save. This was almost like a 5-6 hour day of putting it together, and like the screen glitched, and then just the file was gone. And so I reached out to support, like hopefully they got this stored somewhere, and they're like, nope, sorry. So anyways, that was just definitely a pretty significant bug that caused me to waste
I think
5-6 hours of my life.
Yours is much more relatable.
Not a fun
I think we've
situation.
all been there, but that's a great example.
At a point where you're working on a document, you're working on something, and it just doesn't end up. John, didn't you have something like that happen to you? It wasn't a bug, but were you kind of writing a report and we had a little glitch, and so you're like, I feel it. Like there's so much empathy in the room right now.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So good. Well, if you haven't realized yet, our topic today is around software bugs and our process at Tithely around these things. So for our first question, just to kind of get the ball rolling, I'm going to throw it to John first. But just kind of practically speaking, to kick us off, what is a software bug? Can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
I mean, important wording there. You said a software bug, and I think we'll take that a little further here in a second. But at the end of the day, it's where the code for the software doesn't work as it was designed to. There's something wrong with it that makes it so it doesn't work as it was designed to work. And that could be because there's an actual issue with the code itself that was written, or maybe with where that code exists inside the software, it's not running correctly there because of the context. It's important to point all that out, because even to our engineering team, like if you state something's a bug, but it's actually because perhaps we as product haven't thought through it enough, they're like, that's not a bug. They don't say it mean, but they're like, no, that's not a bug. It's working like you told me to make it work. And they're very quick to point that out. So, and think it's important for us all to understand it in the context of like, what is a software bug? It's actually where that code that was written is not actually functioning the way that it was intended, or making the program itself function the way that it was intended to work.
I think there's kind of this misconception, like bugs are the worst thing ever and everything should stop in order for a bug to be taken care of. And I think just so there's context, because most people don't spend their lives working on software, kind of think about it like your home, right? I think about my house. It is slowly and surely just kind of crumbling away. We had twins 9 months ago. So I have this list that's just getting longer and longer. Things like my daughter's sink. I replaced the faucet, but I still have not had the chance to connect the water lines. It's a whole thing. The ones they sent me don't work. The connections are different sizes. I've been to Lowe's twice now. But I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about a door that I took off and I haven't. Your guys like, damn, what's the state of your house right now? Exactly. But you know what I have not done? Moved out of my house. So very similar software is always going to be in the state of, right, as you're adding new things, as you're updating, there's going to be these things called bugs, right? If you want to follow the original story, like why you might be saying like, Dan, how did they end up being called bugs? Well, way back in the day, in the 1940s and 50s, when computers were first coming out, there was a operator who actually found a moth inside the computer. I mean, these were back when they were doing the data sheets. It was actually causing miscalculations. And so that's where the term software bug actually comes. A little moth showed up in it. But software is going to have bugs. I think in the early days of Tidally, like we have a few bugs here and there. And now we've gone from tens of bugs to hundreds and sometimes thousands, right? And that's just this nature of it. We serve 37,000 churches. And so what we try to do is make sure those critical ones that are are causing the most amount of issues for the most amount of churches are taken care of. But again, they're kind of a part of using software. I will say this: there's not one piece of software that you use, right? Think of all the software out there. You're like, no, Google. Yes, Google has lots of bugs. There's not one piece of software that does not have some bugs. The good companies know how to prioritize the bugs that affect the most people and deal with those ones. And that's what we're trying to do. Like, how can we deal with the ones that impact the most amount of churches? So that's kind of my 2 cents on bugs in general.
Yeah, no, that's great, and this is a great segue actually, Dan, to kind of like the next
Mm.
question of why having a system matters when it comes to bugs and tackling them and working through them. And during one of our team meetings last week, you actually used this great example. I don't want to share because I don't want to steal your thunder, but just around a 5K. So maybe can you walk us through why a system matters and talk about that for a little bit?
Nice thing about and I've only ran one 5K in my life, and I thought I was gonna die halfway through it. So John's like sitting there with his 5K shirt
That's
on, like
right.
ready to roll. So this is just, well, Casey. I made the point in a meeting where if I said, "Hey, if you asked me to go run a 5K, yeah, I'm not in the best of running shapes, and so I would struggle through that. But if I was able to take a bike, no problem." Right. And so what systems are and processes, it's giving a person or a team a bike. So as Tidely is a
Yeah.
young company, we're only 8 years old or so. We're still learning a lot. But one of the things we realized real early on as we went from tens of bugs to hundreds of bugs and sometimes thousands of bugs across all of our software, we realized that we need systems in place. And so we spent a lot of time. You would be actually shocked at the amount of time that we've had to put into making sure that our teams, right, these are dozens of people across different time zones. And in some place, one bug may have different departments looking at it. We had a way to manage communication, to manage workflow, and to manage to make sure that the real thing is actually getting taken care of. If you think about it, you know, you have active user on the software over here. They say, oh, this doesn't seem to be working for me. Maybe you're trying to pull a report and you're clicking on it and you're like, I don't understand, it's not downloading. So you go and you put in a ticket, and the person who takes the ticket isn't going to be the person who jumps in the code. That actually goes
Hmm.
to a developer. And right, we have a whole system and process. And that developer, though, didn't wake up that day kind of like, okay, I'm waiting, I'm sitting here, I'm getting ready for the bug, right? That's not how it works. He has a full day of work. He actually has a full 2 weeks of work typically. So what we have to do is basically take it through this entire process. Now, there's a lot of nuances to it, but we have spent a lot of time perfecting that process to really make sure that we can prioritize bugs, we can get them to the right people, and they can get knocked out quickly. And again, the way we do that is with systems and processes. And we're always willing to change and update our system and process in order to make sure it's effective for the churches we work with.
Absolutely. And then in a second here, John, I'd love to throw it to you to kind of walk through our bug process here at Tidally. But before, Dan, you were involved in a startup company. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, this is kind of in line with some of the stuff you've already been mentioning and outlining here, but maybe just quickly here, some of the differences in the growth and kind of scaling when it comes to a startup dealing with bugs versus kind of like that maturation process of a company dealing with bugs. And then we'd love to, again, John, throw it to you to kind of dive into our process here that we've developed.
Right. Well, when you have a startup, I mean, you only have a couple customers. Like literally, all of your customers because like you signed up today. I mean, it's just a very different circumstance. So I remember that, like sitting there and then be like, hey, this person has an issue, and um, as a startup company, you really struggle with prioritization and how to prioritize. I will say this, right? We were able to get bugs done really quick, but also my only developer quit a week before the Christmas as he was sitting in my car crying, saying, I can't work for you. So we were very judicious on bugs, but maybe that was hindsight being 2020. Maybe that wasn't the best thing. So as an early company, it's like, you're sitting there, you're like, oh, I can be a good project manager. Here's 18 bugs, hey, go knock them out, go get these. But I know we have a backlog. I know I'm tomorrow going to walk in with 4 big ideas that are going to change the landscape of this company. But startup culture, unfortunately, you can be really distracted really quickly. And
Hmm.
so sometimes it's a good thing, right? Hey, we got that bug knocked out quickly. But what I would sometimes do in that lack of maybe discernment around prioritization, I knew I needed these big features done, these ones that are going to impact, right, all of our customers wanted. Sometimes the urgency of a bug would actually derail the new feature. So I would take this thing that I thought was like, man, we got to delight this customer. Well, what they really want was that thing working, and maybe they just again, bugs can pop up in a ton of different ways. Let me give you an example. This is really funny. I was talking early on at Tidally. I was talking to one of our PMs. He's no longer here, and we were having a conversation. He's like, Dan, we got to deal with an issue. He's like, there's a bug that popped up, and we just got to deal with it. I'm like, okay, walk me through, what this bug is. He's like, okay. He's like, it's on mobile devices. I'm like, whoa, we have a lot, we have some churches that use mobile devices. That sounds pretty scary. I said, okay, well, tell me, it's in one of our major pieces of software. Tell me where it's at. He's like, well, it's on this report when you click into this report. So it's like, okay, so we're in mobile devices. So you got to think, this was a desktop app. So as far as how many customers were affected, about that. You really shouldn't even jump on this app at a mobile device, but let's just assume you are. Okay, you're down there. And then he's like, well, it's on this other report. So I'm going down. And the wonderful thing is we have tracking, so we can see how many users click on certain things and do certain stuff in it. And I'm like, okay, so we're in this second layer of this report. And I said, okay, now who specifically does this affect? He said, Opera browsers. And I was like, oh, Opera. I said, it's been a long time. It's not Oprah. It's called Opera, right? It's this browser that 8 people. And literally it came down to this bug affects 6 people. And I'm thinking, man, we got a big roadmap. We got a lot of things we want to knock out. I don't know if we should take the dev time and fix that, or if we could just kindly ask these people, would you mind using Chrome or Safari when you're trying to get to this report? And so sometimes with bugs, we just have to be careful. Like in that situation, I have a responsibility to build for the thousands, right? Not necessarily the few. And so those we really have to juggle. And that's very hard. We want to say yes to everything. But when you say yes to everything, you actually say no to things that are going to delight everybody. And so we're always having to, prioritize. Again, as an early startup, I had no clue. So it's like a bug came in, right? I could walk over across the hall, knock on, good old developer's desk, be like, we need to get this bug done today. And then I could be the hero, come back to the customer at the end of the day, be like, we did that. But yeah, I remember that was a sad, lonely day in my car week before Christmas out in front of Starbucks. He's like, I just can't work for you anymore. So prioritization, there's these people called developers that make this whole thing go around, and we got to be careful that we're not yanking them all over. They need to know what they're working on and be able to have clarity on what they're moving on next. So yeah, again, it's fun to be in the world of software. It's so nuanced, it's so interesting, and yeah, there's a lot of stories to tell. But that, go ahead, John.
You bring up a lot with. I think it's not just as you bring up even your story of Opera, which by the way, it makes me think that the 6 people viewing your product on like a Nintendo Wii or something. That's the only thing I know that even really would ever use that. But like it's also, are there workarounds? There's so many more things than just, because you said, what, couldn't they just use Chrome? Like, let's say it was these 8 users and they literally have nothing they can do to get around it. That does change the perspective. And that's what's interesting as you're looking at anything. Like, yes, as I'm comparing the 1,000 against the 6 or the 8 or the 20, the 1,000 is going to have to outweigh it. But like if there's a workaround, then it's like, I'm sorry, like we can't. And there's so many different things to think around. And even as you talk about this, as you're thinking about new features, where the company's going, the bugs, the big bugs, the small bugs, it's like a strategy game if you've ever played one. Like you've got all these different elements you're constantly thinking of and moving them around the board. And the bugs are a big part of that, but it's still competing with everything else as well as the different size of bugs there are on your plate.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And especially, Dan, as you kind of outlines just the growth strategy that comes from being a startup where you wear multiple hats to then as you scale up any organization, church, tech company, whatever, you start to have these systems and processes in place that brings that clarity, like you mentioned, of what we do and why we do it the way that we do it. So transitioning over to you, John, at Tithely, we do have a system, right? We're continually growing up. We're never not improving, looking for ways to get better. But where we're at right now, can you walk us through a bit of our process when it comes to bug diagnosing them, prioritizing them?
Absolutely. And first of all, before I say any of this, I want to give a shout out to Carl. We all love Carl. And I realize I say this in a
Yeah,
podcast where nobody
That's
outside of
right.
Tithely knows who I'm talking about, most likely. But Carl is one
okay.
of our leads on the engineering team. And he created an entire process by interviewing all the different teams here at Tithely and trying to understand how each team could be served best by this. And it's a glorious thing.
Yeah.
So this process, it starts with probably you, the listener, submitting a bug, right? And usually when you submit a bug, almost always when you submit a bug, it's going to hit our support team, who I will refer to as CX just because I always refer to them as CX. But understand, as I say that, you're probably thinking of them as support. The support team's going to get that ticket, and then they're actually going to review that bug on multiple steps in their own system. So anybody on the support team is going to file that bug, but then someone with more technical know-how in their space is actually going to review that bug and make sure it actually is a repeatable bug. They're also going to even evaluate, hey, is this something that has a workaround? Because honestly, if there's a workaround, usually CX support will just usually just say, hey, can you just do this? Especially the Opera browser. That probably wouldn't have even made it to me, Casey, or Dan. That would have stopped probably at support because, hey, there's 8 people. Could you just do this? Because you're kind of an unconventional case here that we can't really work around right now or work for right now. Let's say it does make it a step further. That bug now from support, it will go onto my plate, Casey's plate, on a product manager's plate. So at that point now, it's for my consideration because CX has determined, hey, this is a bug, it's repeatable, there's no workaround, and it's big enough to be worth your consideration. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone on our support team. So if you ever talk to our support team, I just said this big chunk of work, and like they're responsible for so much of it, and they do an amazing job at that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I personally
absolutely.
get to work closely with Chris on my end, but different people on our team work with different people. I can tell you one thing: people in Tidally love Chris. If you ever happen to run across Chris, that dude is amazing. But it, usually Chris will chat with me and be like, "Okay, these are the big ones. These are what I want you to consider." And there are times where, okay, this week I can't even look at it. I understand they're big, and honestly, that's where it's a difficult discussion of, "Hey, I know y'all really want this too. Is it worth like help me balance this? Help me play this strategy game. Can you be like my phone a friend, or I'm talking to you, Chris, to understand this, or whoever I'm talking to?" At that point, product is working with CX to understand. If CX still can justify it being pulled in, now I'm talking to my tech lead. So the product manager, which is really everybody on this call at different levels here, we're determining, okay, we're taking this, carrying the baton from CX support to talk to our tech lead to understand, all right, what's it going to take to do this now? Is this something we consider? And something that I love about our systems and what Dan even brought up of like a scaling company to a company that's grown is that you don't just have, even if a bug comes through, it's high profile, like it's affecting a lot of people, but it's not just tearing the system down. Even if it hurts, you're usually going to need to wait until what most tech companies have sprints. So every 2 weeks or intervals like that, 2 weeks or more is usually what it is. We start a new block of work. And a lot of what a product manager is doing, which is once again us on this call, is working with our tech lead to understand what that next block of work is going to be and potentially even what the block of work is going to be after that. So as this bug is now coming through and I know,
Yeah.
okay, this is something I'm going to do, I'm meeting with my tech lead to not say, should we stop everything and work on it? I'm saying, hey, can we start working on this in a week and a half? Because this has come across my desk as something big. And I'll tell you, as a product manager, and as any of us that have worked together managing products, that's one of the hardest things to do, is to know, oh my goodness, 1,500 customers are affected by this. Support is getting blasted by, just happening recently, 40 customers a day are reaching out to us about this. And I'm having to still say to Chris, I think we're going to have to wait a week and a half because the thing we're working on right now, we would lose days of time to switch channels to do this and then switch back. And I mean, to have a whole
Mm.
engineering team need to do that, that's a huge cost associated with it. So that'll give you an idea of this is me talking about dealing with churches here. Like this is something I am so deeply passionate about. This is the kingdom, and we're making decisions here about, okay, can I like, is this worth $10,000 to do a double switch of the engineering time and blow multiple days on both sides to deal with the bug impacting this many churches? So you can imagine how difficult that is. And it also gives you a really good idea of why sometimes things are paused longer than you would like to see them paused as you're submitting a ticket. Let's say it does make it into that sprint then. It starts on a specific day. For instance, in my case, for the giving team, on every other Friday, that sprint starts. And now we slate the priority of that sprint so that bugs being handled at a certain level. I can tell you on my end, I have a bug at the very top of my sprint starting today. I'm not going to say what day this is to date this episode, but that's how it works. Then I have below that a number of features and then a bug at the bottom of the sprint. But it's my job then to work with the tech lead to understand how are the bugs mixing in with everything else we're doing. And I've sandwiched my features between a super high bug and a super low bug in priority. From there, the engineering team takes it. The goal here is they tackle it within that 2-week period, and it will get tackled based on where it is in priority during that 2-week period. And once it's finished, Carl, who we celebrate already, his handy dandy system is designed to actually notify support as it's actually finished up. But before that happens, the engineering team finishes it. It goes into QA, where if everything works perfectly, the product manager can test it to make sure it works as expected. And also someone on our QA team can test it to make sure it works as expected. Then it goes to production. And that's when CX is notified, hey, this is now fixed. You can reach out to all the customers that actually filed a bug about this. But I walked you through a nice detail. And I know that was like painfully long, deep explanation. At the same time, I think any of you listening who have dealt with a bug probably appreciate it to the moon just to understand, oh, that's why that thing I did, maybe it took 3 weeks to take care of it, even though I felt like it was a click, right? Well, yeah, that click still means someone who's deep in work needs to stop everything to do that. And usually it isn't a click. I joke with my tech lead that I'm notoriously bad at stating, hey, by the way, I have a tech background. I was a developer for 10 years, and I'm still have a notoriously bad reputation with him of saying, oh man, I think this is a small one. And I'll describe it to him. He's like, nope, that's not a small one, John. So, yeah, it's a difficult thing. So if I'm feeling that way, you're feeling that way times 100. So yeah, that's how things can also be blown out by misunderstandings.
On that point, we're horrible, aren't we? Sometimes we're like, because we're very empathetic. I hope no one takes away like, oh, they don't care about bugs or they've given up on. They're just in mediocrity. It is the bugs are frustrating and they're annoying, and when you hit one, and especially they never come at the right time. It's always like, I gotta hit this report out now. I gotta get this done tomorrow. I gotta send this off right now. Right. So it's not like there's an opportune time for bugs to happen. So I hope you're not hearing us and man, they don't care about these. They are a nature of building software. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to build the systems and the processes where we can manage the bugs as well as build the new features. And sometimes you end up with companies, maybe they manage the bugs. And here's the secret. Bugs only happen as you're really pushing out a lot of new code, right? So if you don't want to have bugs, well, keep the platform exactly the same, right? Basically, all you have to deal with is, code updates, right? If the PHP code actually needs to go from whatever to whatever. But if you're actually shipping new stuff, it's gonna reveal some bugs. It's gonna hit some things. And one of the things we're really passionate at here is being a company that ships. We actually look at the church space and we see how little innovation has been done in the church space. And we're kingdom-minded people here. We're actually excited to bring this innovation, which means we're going to be pushing out new stuff, which means the dark side of that is there's going to be bugs that pop up because new things go out. There's a ripple down effect. It's interesting too on the hey, I think this is going to be small. The moon does look pretty small from our vantage point, doesn't it? As we get up closer, and that's what our developers do. You may be clicking on something like, why isn't this report? Why isn't it general? I don't know why I'm on reports today and generating report. Why isn't this just doing what it's supposed to be doing? And we're kind of going, hey, this ought to be fixed. And as a developer gets closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, they begin to realize, oh man, this is pretty significant to change. And so what we want is just great software here. So you have to deal with the bugs, and you also have to plan on building the new features. And those two, you just have to deal with the tension of both of those.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And to John's point, like walking through our process, and it's important to have that process of prioritizing what we work on, how we work on it, when we work on it. And I'm reminded at the beginning of this episode, Dan, you kind of mentioned the house example, the house analogy of just like the difference of, again, I'm excited to see DIY Dan going around fixing stuff around your home one day.
My wife is too. My wife is like, come on, Dan, let's get this done.
Let's get this done. Classic honey to-do list, right?
It's getting to that point where I'm just like, I have a half, like it like my brain, and John, you're probably like this. I have an espresso machine that's not working. I replaced a solenoid valve. I got a sauna that I'm replacing all the panels in. I got a bathroom sink. I got a door that's just not there. So you're like, we had twins, guys. Like lots of grace. We had twins 9 months ago.
So much grace. Yep.
There are things where 9 months ago, Dan would have been like, y'all never do that. And now we're just, all the kids are alive.
Mm-hmm.
They're just all alive.
Yeah.
They're all going to bed. And so we did a good job.
That's right. The core things are happening. And I'm just like, even at our house, we live in northern Alberta in Canada. All right. The frigid north. And so in the winter, we just moved here in the summer, this past summer. And during the winter season, our furnace stopped working. And so we have the squeaky doors, we have these little things, some of the elements like you mentioned, Dan, around the house, but I'm loving that analogy of like kind of like the home fixer-upper projects and how to prioritize. Obviously, we dropped everything to fix the furnace in the middle of northern Canadian winter and didn't quite worry about the squeaky door to the bedroom for a couple of weeks there. And so again, John, thank you for walking us through our process there, a little bit of like how bugs come in, how do we triage, how do we categorize it, and how do we then tackle it in connection with some of these big initiatives that our team is working on and moving forward in our roadmap. And maybe just digging into that a little bit deeper, John, would you potentially be able to give like an example of a bug that's come up and our team has diagnosed and then solved? Kind of like walk a single bug through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually not going to name off a bug specifically, just for the sake of once again dating, and that's just kind of weird for me to name off a specific bug. But we had an issue come up where something happened in our software where something wasn't displaying correctly, and it was brought to us by CX once again. Chris, one of the greatest people on earth, I think we can all agree. Chris and I are chatting through it, trying to figure out, okay, what are the implications of this happening? So I actually kick it back to Chris and I say, hey, can you let me know if X, Y, or Z is happening because of this? Because that'll help me understand the extent of it. Once again, praise to our CX team. They take it on themselves. And then over the next 48 hours, they're investigating it, initially saying, we don't think it's a problem, to the point where, oh, it is a problem. Oh, actually, it's a pretty big problem. Now it comes back to my plate where they have now put together where they think the core issues with that bug are. And I can now pass it along to my team to be able to figure out what we need to do. In this case, because of everything CX was able to get us, we could actually roll back a change we had made. And that allowed the problem not to exist anymore. And that actually shows like how confusing things can be though. Because, okay, the bug's not happening anymore. What do we do about the any sort of fallout from that bug? And so now you need to actually walk through that fallout. So a bug turned into two bugs, one to fix the thing. And this is actually very common for a bug. Now, one thing is to fix the thing. The other thing is to actually deal with anything that occurred in the system because of that bug and fix that. But this process, it's the process working beautifully. And honestly, as we were finishing up this process, I got to go to Chris as well as some more of CX. And this is something we do internally, which is so great, and say, hey, let's do a post-mortem here, which is something surrounding any sort of big bug. Let's talk about, should I have moved faster with you? Should you have moved faster? Is there anything we can improve here? And I think that's something from a product perspective. Anytime you read a product book, which I doubt many people here are reading product books outside of people speaking on this podcast, but very
like daily devotions, going through the word, picking up a good product book. I kind of built some good software.
Well,
I'm shocked.
As you all know, everyone, the way that we're supposed to do things is continually iterate. Like as we do something, and it's even something I said we do this 2-week blocks sprints. Technically, the best thing you can do is then talk about how did that last 2 weeks go and how can the next 2 weeks be better. Because if you can do that, holy schmoly, in 20 weeks are you going to be an awesome team. In the same way as we go through things like this with support, specifically getting to talk through it with Chris and understand how could we have done this better to make sure that customers have the best experience possible. And that's where I love to bookend this with that. At the tail end, started with CX, and the tail end, I'm figuring out with CX, how can we make this better for customers? And honestly, that's exactly how this went down. I didn't even pick that scenario for that. That's just how most scenarios end. So yeah, there you go.
No, that's so good. So good. And so I know for me, before I worked at Tithely and I was in the church space, when it came to things like bugs, to your point, Dan, is I kind of had just that super surface level understanding of bugs are just associated with software. And then as you rightfully unpacked, part of it is that as we're innovating, as we're growing, as we're launching new features, new products, etc., it's just a byproduct of that. But maybe a follow-up question for both you guys is, what are some proactive steps that we can take to do what we can to minimize bugs or to kind of deal with the bug before it actually gets launched and is out there. And then we're kind of reactively through the system that we've developed, and Carl and the team have done a great job developing. But what are some of those proactive steps that we take as a product team when it comes to bugs?
So first of all, I mean, I love celebrating people here. And I think a great thing about even this podcast is just humanizing Tithely and letting you understand the people here that work here. We have an amazing director of engineering that is Christian. And then I already mentioned Carl, but Carl and Rick really work as I'll say that the second in commands in engineering. And they've put some great things in the works that really product doesn't even need to worry about now because of the way they put things in place. And these things are, as you're at a startup, you're just pushing out code like crazy. Usually it's one guy, so who's going to review his code anyway, right? It's a dude. And like as a company scales up, you need to learn to be able to have engineers start reviewing their code. And you'll hear words like PR, pull requests thrown around everywhere. You're having systems like Git through something like GitHub put in place where easily these engineers can now work together. But the process is that as a company scales, people are coming in from all these different angles that are doing things different ways. And this engineering leadership that we have has really helped to systematize it. So now as any code goes out, the way things are reviewed, right? The way things are QA'd, the way we have tests set up in code, because in code, you can actually set up tests. So as a change is made over here, I want to make sure, you can't even see my hand there. As a change is made over here, I want to make sure it's not breaking this over here or this over here. So you have code coverage throughout all your code to understand, okay, our sites platform has 98% code coverage. And that means that as changes are made, 98% of the platform now will know if it's going to break due to the code changing anywhere. And that's something we want to have as much code coverage as possible. And any company wants to have as much code coverage as possible to help them understand if something new is built, as changes are made, as they always will be, will a change that may seem completely unrelated break this product in any way? And that's something that, oh my goodness, our engineering team is doing a great job. I don't even have to think about it, but it's so important for me to know it, for you to know it as a listener, for CX to know it, for everyone to know it. Anybody that works with Tidely should just be so thankful for what this engineering team is doing to make sure this stuff is all working smoothly. And then also just having a QA team, something that I can be more involved with. I said that one of the final stages there of our bug process, but it's really of anything, is to have me or whoever in product testing something thoroughly, and then also to have someone from QA blasting it from every angle to just try to make sure, hey, can I break it? Is there anything that'll break it? Is there anything CX needs to be aware of that might be an edge case that we don't want to worry about right now, but could break it? And that's a huge part as well. So I think those pieces really working together, we obviously will always need a process for dealing with bugs, but the best thing possible is to have a process for avoiding them in the first place.
Yeah, that's so good. And I just to clarify, maybe for the churches listening, John, when you talk about QA, what do you mean by that?
Well, it would be quality assurance is what the department is for, but it's usually you'll have and I don't know what you think of it. I think you'll have terms like IT, and I'm like, so you say IT, that's a really open, you could be doing anything there, right? You could be working with hardware or software. In the same way, QA, it's very easy. You hear it, you're probably used to hearing it, but this is usually a very technical person that's basically a developer. And even saying basically is probably not really giving them. They are a developer who's going in and usually coding tests that they'll have for the platform, ways they can rapidly test new features within a given product and test all these different scenarios without having to manually click through everything. So we have the tests in the code to make sure code's not breaking. And then you have a human or a series of humans that's actually going through, and they have tests set up that are actually going through and doing the things manually in the product to make sure they work. And sometimes it'll just be me and a QA tester. Sometimes it's a series of QA testers. Sometimes it's a QA tester with what I just said, code that they've actually written to be able to test it. But either way, having that in place, that's what your QA team is doing. And they're quality assurance. They're making sure that whatever it is you're releasing is quality and will benefit the customer versus causing problems for the customer.
Awesome. And then Dan, just wanted to give you an opportunity as we'll wrap up here in just a minute, this episode of Tithely Backstage. Any final thoughts around bugs, process, kind of how we diagnose and triage, or any kind of just word to the churches that are listening about maybe best practices of submitting bugs, anything along those lines?
I think it's pretty simple, self-explanatory. When you see a bug, just report it. And then I can't tell you how much we appreciate your patience, right? It can be frustrating. I mentioned this earlier, and just so you know, there's a lot of people working really hard at taking care of really, really smart people. I'm always amazed. John mentioned it, just the quality of people we get here. These people could work anywhere. I mean, they could go work at some of the best tech companies in the world, and they choose to work here specifically because they get to work with churches. And so when you do submit that bug, I don't want you to think for a second that it gets put right in some cabinet somewhere and forgotten about. There's a lot of people who work very hard to make sure those are they're reviewed, they're given to the right people, they're prioritized, they're communicated on. It's a big deal. So again, I appreciate, and we're growing too. So I'd say if you maybe haven't had a bad bug experience at Tithely, man, hang in there. We are working on our systems. We're constantly trying to improve. And so feel free to reach out. We'd love to know how, from your vantage point, we could actually do better. This is just an area that we want to keep growing in. That would be my, just appreciate the patience. And we do, we feel a ton of love from each one of the churches that we get to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely second that one of our values at Tidally is innovation. We're never not growing and learning and wanting to do things better. And bugs is a topic that can be a source of frustration as you're experiencing it. As Dan mentioned a little earlier in this episode, it's like bugs come up at convenient times. It's actually usually the most inconvenient times that bugs are happening. And so with that, one of the goals of this podcast, Tithely Backstage, is to quite literally show you the backstage of how we do stuff, why we do stuff on the product team here at Tithely, kind of lifting the hood, if you will, and just kind of showing you how we do stuff, why we do it, and some of the values and systems and processes around that. So that's our goal. We're going to continue to do that as we film these episodes, and we would love for your continued engagement as well. So thanks you for joining us for this episode of Tithely Backstage, and we will see you next time.